Last week I said that I wanted to start a kind of a transition, and we'll finish that up today. As we've been going, we've been studying Ephesians chapter 5. We've been studying, the picture, the opportunity that God has given husbands to reveal the character of Christ as we demonstrate Christ to the world, anybody who would even pay attention as we live our lives with our wives. And the reason I want to take a little bit of a break, I might do this differently when I actually formulate it. I'm working on a workbook with this and presentations for the future. But I took a little bit of a break because even in the midst of all those good discussions, I did have some good discussion with people, with men who struggled a little bit with the idea this is such a huge responsibility. I'll talk about that in a little bit later today. Seemed a little bit overwhelmed by it, sometimes burdened. Sometimes some folks even mentioned this seems a little bit unfair, a little bit one-sided. And of course, I have to explain why I have to do one at a time. But I get that, especially if there's some struggles and maybe there's some guilt feelings, which we all at times think about. I mean, if you're like me, I think about Lord, I really want to do better at everything. I want to be a better husband. I want to be a better father. So sometimes that's a struggle. So that's why I really wanted to go have that little break, because sometimes when we start looking what the Lord has revealed, has given for the wives as they reveal, not necessarily the Christ part of the relationship, but they reveal the church part of the relationship. That's a tough one sometimes to digest, especially when we live in the environment that we do of a worldly culture. And so I wanted to, as I started last week, it's hard, it's difficult when we think about that, just like it is sometimes when we think about simply being a Christian. We do have to know the doctrine. It's good to know all the ways that we know that the Lord works in transferring us. We have the renewal of the mind. He's transforming the character as we behold Him in glory. We talked about that. And I said, but one of the things that sometimes is missing is not just that you have all the knowledge, and maybe we have the mechanisms down pat, at least as much as it's revealed. Not everything is revealed in the mechanism how the Lord transforms us. I hope we understand that. We're going to learn more when we get to glory, but we understand that which is revealed, right? Because that which reveals belongs to us. That which is not revealed is what? Those are the Lord's, and we'll know it by and by, as some of the songs will say. So we're excited about that. But one thing, sometimes when people are discovering that, and as they're learning, they understand that they are to be holy as God is holy. They understand the call to righteousness. And they want it so bad that even if they don't quite have maybe the words right, or maybe all the scriptures, have some of the scriptures, but they want it so bad. I gave the example of the farmers who sacrificed so much because they wanted to please the Lord. Even if they hadn't figured out a few things, the Lord works with our desires. And can you imagine, perhaps, if we do understand the doctrine, we do understand the renewal and the transformation process, if we can really get that desire to go with it, we want it, the difference that it would make. So just picking up from there, because blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, because what is the promise in that? They shall be satisfied. King James says they shall be filled. They'll be filled up. And so, we really have to want that. And this is a little bit of a review from last week. We want it more than wanting justice or fairness for ourselves in our lives, period, but even in our marriage. We want the right thing more than we want to prove ourselves right and prove ourselves and get justice. And a few of these things overlap a little bit. But we've got to want it more than wanting to prove that we are right or prove that we are correct. That's in life. But certainly, of course, in marriage. We want the right thing. We want what God wants. We want righteousness. We hunger and thirst for it. We want it more than we want to strengthen our selfish pride. Because it's really hard to admit that you're wrong sometimes. Anybody struggle with that besides me sometimes? Yeah. It's just hard when you're right most of the time. You know what I'm saying? I'm just kidding. But anyway, Paul, anyway. We want righteousness. We want what's right more than the things of this world, because doing the right thing doesn't always get us what the world offers. And the same thing in in marriage. Doing the right thing in marriage is not going to always give us what the world upholds as good and popular and valuable. We want it more than compromising the security that the world offers. There's a lot of security and maybe doing things maybe a little sneaky or a little underhanded. You know, whether it's in our marriage, you know, sometimes people try to manipulate in the marriage to get their way, which is not holy. It's not loving. You know, but in life, we've got to want the right thing. We've got to want righteousness more than compromising security that the world offers. So, like I say, fervently preaching this and saying you ought to do it is not going to make it stick for you or for me. I can't say, hunger and thirst for righteousness, you do it. And everybody's like, well, I'm glad he said that, because I'm hungry now. I am hungry now that you screamed that, you know, to the top of your voice, and you were fervent. I'm hungry for it. Same thing's true. I can't say, get your marriage together. I can't say, do the right thing and do it God's way and point. And my family makes fun of me because they say I do my glasses like that. I don't even know. I'm not trying to do that. They say I'm gentle till I pull my glasses off. They're off, everybody. Okay, so watch out. You know, I can't. No preaching, no order can just make that happen because the words are spoken. But there are things that will foster desire. I'm not going to read over all these verses that we talked about. But faith in God's word, actually believing God, because God tells us things that are better. You know, sometimes when you sit down and you reason with people and they're making horrible choices in life, you try to present, well, you know, if you change a few things, or maybe if you don't steal, you know, you can actually earn money and not worry about going to jail. You know, whatever. We reason how things are better. And sometimes it's really hard to get through to people, but God really does tell us, whether it's in life in general or in marriage, and how it ought to be conducted and what it ought to look like. He just knows better. And so actually believing Him, and that's a tough one. Everybody, okay, I'll tell you, who here believes that God knows best, okay? Yeah, everybody's going to say that. But when you deal with things in life, sometimes there's just so many distractions. There's so many pulls at the heart that it's really hard, and sometimes in given moments, to actually believe that. So we do pray. Luke 17:5, increase our faith. By the way, that was a prayer of the apostles, the people who saw the miracles of Jesus. You know what I'm saying? You know, increase our faith. And He was giving them all these signs and all these wonders so that they would have faith, so that they would believe. You know, that was part of it at least. And then we got the Gentile who had a child that was demon-possessed in Mark 9:24. And Jesus said, of course, if you believe. And he said, I do believe. A great declaration. And then it hit him all of a sudden. My life is crazy. My kid's demon-possessed. Things are nuts. You know, yeah, I believe, but what? Help my unbelief. These are honest cries from the heart. So the Lord is ready for that. So, you know, we really want to believe God. Not just believe in Him, but believe Him. He knows the better way. This helps us to hunger and thirst for the right thing. Hunger and thirst for righteousness, because God actually shows us what is good. And then we talked about honest evaluation of your past desires and efforts that have failed. There is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end, it's a way of death. We try a lot of things, don't we? With emotions, whether it be in our lives, just in general, but in our marriages. We try a lot of things. Sometimes we try by raising our voice and putting our foot down just so we can get things to go our way. Some men do that sometimes. Sometimes, instead of discussing it, you ladies might cry a lot, and they're like, okay, I can't talk about this now. Okay, you're crying. Let's just go do something. You know, whatever. You know, sometimes we intentionally manipulate. Sometimes it's not intentional, but sometimes it is. Here's the thing. It never fixes anything. So we need to honestly look back and say, what have I tried? And what has really what has helped and what really hasn't? And then I always love Luke 15. We talked about last time, 11 through 32. You know, the story of the prodigal son. He thought he knew better than his father. And again, I'm not trying to hit. Don't we all go through this a little bit? Who has sinned and fallen short of the glory of God? Everybody has, you know, everybody sometimes, you know, doesn't the book of Romans tell us that everyone has followed their own way? There's none as righteous, not even one. You know, everybody to a certain extent goes to this point, and then everybody, like the prodigal son, comes to his senses, and he said, maybe I ought to go back to the guy who knows better than I do. That's true in life. And it's true even when we're dealing with our marriages. Particularly, we've been talking about men. You know, God tells us this way. It seems hard. This seems like more maybe than I can do. We're talking about Jesus here. You know, he's a perfect example. That's a tough one. But okay, maybe God's right here. I haven't done so well. Maybe He's right. And again, This is review. Psalm 37:4 and then Deuteronomy 37:4 talks about delight yourself in the Lord. You turn to the Lord and understand He's right. And He'll give you the desire of your hearts because you're going to start following the better things. And when you seek the better things, guess what He's going to do? He's going to give them to you, okay? You'll seek me and my ways, Phil Sutton paraphrase, and you'll find me if you seek me with what? All of your heart. You know, this is what God wants. And then, again, I love Deuteronomy 6:6-9 because it talks about, hear, O Israel, the God is one, you know, and all those commands there. But it ends by saying, you know, talk to Him, talk about Him. You know, put His message, put the truth up on the doorpost. Wear it as frontals upon your forehead. When you rise up and when you lay down, talk about the things of the Lord. Talk about those good things so they're ever before you. Who else should you talk to them about? How about your kids? Isn't that what that chapter says in Deuteronomy? Talk to your kids about it. Talk good about the good things of the Lord. Talk positively about the good and the righteous things. See, these are helping us develop that desire generally for life, but certainly true for our marriage. But it's good to have a picture. It's good to have something to look towards. Jesus is our ultimate picture, and that helps us to understand, you know, what the right thing is. But His reward is our ultimate picture. You know, sometimes it's really hard to deal with the things of earth unless I really think about heaven. You know, that's what I love. I think we ought to sing at least one song about heaven every Lord's Day. I think it will be a good thing. Because there's plenty of songs out there, you know, because we're reminded of that which is before us, that better thing, that best thing that is there. And we have to have that picture, ultimately Jesus, because as we keep our eyes on Him, you know, we're able to lay aside the sins and the encumbrances. He is our inheritance, just like we are His inheritance. That's why He was able to endure the cross. He was able to bear the shame. We keep our eyes on the prize. We keep our eyes on the picture, which kind of brings us back to marriage here. You know, again, one of my favorite verses in the Bible about Jacob and Rachel. You know the story. Weird story. It was just hard to find a wife back then, I guess. You had to be sent to this country and that country, you know, to figure out and, you know, you got to follow these clues along the way. The same thing now. You got to make sure you do it right. I got to do this formula just right to make her like me. You know, a little bit different. But you know, there's a mystery. There's following the Lord and seeking the Lord. But Jacob and Rachel, Jacob had a picture. He really wanted this to happen. There was a goal, and he had 7 years. Now we know there's a lot of sin going on in there, a lot of deception by things that were somewhat out of his control. But when he was presented the difficult task, we get Genesis 29:20. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of his love for her. See, the picture. The right picture helps our spiritual appetites. The right picture of Christ helps develop those spiritual appetites. The picture of being with the Lord forever in glory alters our spiritual appetites to not hunger for the things of the world, but for the things of God. And the same thing, having that picture of what the Lord wants us to be, and the picture that the Lord has of what a marriage needs to look like, and understanding it, that's why we're doing this, and understanding it gives us something to look forward to so much that doing the work is like this. It's a lot of work, but not really, because look what I'm getting. That's what happens when you have the picture. And now, man, I think about Jesus. Man, Jesus. Jacob here, 7 years was the thing. Jesus, from the dawn of creation when Adam and Eve sinned, his heart was aching for that time when there would be reconciliation, when his bride would be back. And he was glad to the point where, what is it? It was his what for Jesus to suffer? Do you remember? It was God's pleasure. Different versions say it a different way. For Jesus to suffer. It's not one of those things where, you know, he wanted that in the sense that he wanted pain. But the point is, he had a goal. The Lord had a goal of reconciliation, so that, quote unquote, the 7 years seemed like but a few days because of God's love for us over the span of time. What is your picture? Well, I hope your picture, and again, the kind of, for men, because we've talked about them so far, I hope the picture is Christ in the church. And really trying to understand the great opportunity that the Lord has given us, again, to reveal the character of Christ and to express that to our wives, because it's a blessing to us, it's a blessing to her. The greater message blesses the lesser one. But just a few practical things that I want to point to you. When you have a picture, when you have that picture, and then you try to formulate in your mind what it's going to look like here on earth. When I talk to people who are troubled, and couples who are troubled, I encourage them to dream. I encourage them to think about, in the context of the Scripture, where do you want to be? What are you going for? Because sometimes people know that they're not happy and they don't like it the way that it is now. Well, what do you want it to look like? Well, they talk a lot about how bad it is sometimes, but they have a hard time formulating what are they really shooting for? What are you looking forward to? What picture of this marriage do you have? Well, the picture needs to be Christ in the church, and we're developing that. But sometimes it's good to really say, well, what is that actually going to look like in our lives? So it helps to have righteous imagination rather than worldly imagination. You'll not believe how many guys I've asked, what does it look like? And I have had men say to me, I just wish when I say something that she would just go along with it. I've heard this so many times. She always has something to say about something that I want to do. Something to say. It's a shame people think, isn't it? It's a shame people have something to say. That's what I want. And then I say, okay. Well, then I try to back up and I say, well, when you think about a perfect couple out there, who would you like? When you see a couple, I want my marriage to be like that. It's interesting, the number of men that have named the same couple. And this couple, I can't say too much, but I'll say this. This couple, the man is happy because the woman's just yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. But I know for a fact, because I know a lot of things that a lot of people don't know, because people talk to me, that the wife is miserable and sad and unhappy and unfulfilled, but she's doing her duty to Christ because that's the right thing to do. Does God honor her for that? You better believe it. He honors her. But it's interesting that men would say, that's what I want. There's some that say that. That's not a righteous picture. That's not righteous imagination. Are you following me here? Same thing. Sometimes women are not happy. And I have said, okay, what do you want? I don't know. I just don't want this. Well, pick a couple. A couple that you know, or maybe a couple that we both know. And I've had several women name the same couple that I know for a fact that the man is miserable, but he would rather just give in on anything than fight. And it always goes the wife's way. He's not allowed to lead. It always goes her way. They say, that's a good relationship over there. That's what I want. See, that's not righteous imagination. That is not righteous imagination. We have really got to step back and dream of what it looks like in the context of Ephesians chapter 5. And ladies, we'll get to that. What is a beautiful, desirable marriage? What's something that says, ooh, I want that? What does it look like? And I encourage people to dream and dream about it. Saturate your mind with godly outcomes, okay? I hate the what if game. Back in the day, if I had just not done this, or if I had just not done that, think about how things would be. What if I had said this instead of said that? What if I had done this? What if I had taken this action? What if I had invested this money? What if I had taken this job? That'll drive you nuts, won't it? But the present what ifs, and then thinking about the consequences of those or the results of those, they can be very, very encouraging when you imagine positive outcomes. Like, man, we'll make it general. What if I loved my wife as Christ loved the church? And I really did. What if I just made that every part of the way I lived? What would my marriage look like in 5 years? That's exciting imagining and going through the scenarios of positive outcomes. What if I did? What if I took the time to listen and to understand? What if I was approachable as Christ is approachable? We can confidently approach him. What if when she approached me, I always received her with mercy and grace to help in time of need, like the Lord receives us? What would the relationship look like? And then you start imagining specifics. You imagine the emotions. You imagine the relationship and the bond. You imagine how you can work together in partnership for the Lord. You can imagine joy and happiness and love. Those are good things to think about. Those are good what ifs. So saturate your mind with godly outcomes. In other words, you have that picture of Christ in the church, and it particularly, you got to imagine what's that going to look like in our lives. You know, what kind of joy can that bring? That's your picture. And you saturate your mind with those godly outcomes. And then you know that it takes faith and work. Faith and work. Faith sometimes is a tough one. You know, believing sometimes is hard. Faith and belief is called a work. It's the work of the Lord to believe in Him. You know, so it's a work, and then work, of course, is work. You know, and that's kind of a tough one. But when you understand the picture, that you're going for, 7 years seems like what? A few days. I remember when Paul and I were really trying to figure out to get our business to work here, because we're not business people. People say, what's your business plan? We don't have a business plan. We weren't planning to have a business. You know, it just kind of happened as we were trying to figure out life. And I remember this one company, somebody recommended us, and we went, and it was going to be a lot of money, but I particularly was going to be working 6 nights a week late, sometimes after Bible study. Sometimes I didn't get home till like 2 in the morning. Does that sound pleasant to anybody? But the reason that I grabbed onto it and I was whistling and singing the whole time, it wasn't because I was being present, positive, affirmative. It's okay to be that sometimes, but I wasn't just forcing myself to pretend like I was liking it, you know. The new Snow White's out. Hadn't seen it, but the old one is whistle while you work, you know. Sometimes you can whistle while you work when you have a picture. And the idea was I knew that the Lord had given us an opportunity to make our business work. That was the shift that turned it into a great thing. And I knew it. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go from just a few hours of sleep to just a few less hours of sleep. But I had a picture. I can make this work. And it didn't bother me one bit. And that's how it is when you have the picture that's up there. And then, you know, and just thinking about that, young people need to see examples and instruction in this area. You know, the Apostle Paul said, follow my example as what? I follow Christ's example. No, by the way, I've had this discussion a lot of times with people, and people will say, I don't understand. We've been talking about new creation for all this time, and I seem to not be able to get it. And it seems a lot of people around me, you know, they get the concept, but you know, really struggle with living it out. It is a process, isn't it? You know, these are baby steps. We understand that. But one thing that often comes up is people say, I just don't know anybody that's really got it. I'm not saying they're not out there, but people say that to me. Yeah, I don't know that's really got it, and man, they're just sit there. They're living for Christ. They're doing the Lord's work. They're full of love. They're full of joy. I just don't think there's that many people out there. Well, you know, that's one of the reasons why we live this way. You know, Ezekiel tells us that we actually prove God's righteous. We prove He's right. Or God proves Himself right by us as He gives us a new heart and we develop, and we're actually living and doing the will of the Lord. It's wonderful, and we do it for other people. We do it. You know, I walk in the paths of righteousness for who? His name's sake. You know, the Lord is doing this so that His message can go forward. So it's really important, and it's really helpful that as the apostle was showing how this happened, he was showing how someone could be transformed into the image of Jesus. He was given the example. We need to do that, but guess what? It would really be good, not just for our own joy, and not just for our own purpose and our partnership in doing the will of the Lord, but man, the more we get this, it's going to, because any bad examples out there in the world of marriage? Yeah. To give. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why people say they don't want to get married. Did you know the divorce rate is actually lower than it was 20 years ago? Yay, right? No. Why is it lower? People just aren't getting married. Because they're like, why? I mean, look at what's going on. I mean, it's really, really important for our children and for anybody who will pay attention to see that. So again, you have the picture. You have the picture, and it doesn't seem as impossible. 7 years can seem like a few days in our lives as Christians, but even in our lives as husbands and wives. So understanding and practicing such things will help. It'll help husbands who, although they have the perfect example of Christ, may struggle due to the very fact that Christ is perfect. This can be intimidating and overwhelming. And I'm not just coming up with this. People say this. I'm supposed to love my wife as Christ loved the church. That's a tall order. And so understanding the picture that Christ had that got him to the cross, that got him to do the will of the Lord, helps us to understand that concept. We really need to have a good picture of marriage. Ephesians 5 is the big picture, and then we dream and we imagine all these positive outcomes and how we can apply that. It gives us a goal. Understanding this idea of having the picture will help men who may struggle with the idea that they are the ones who lead in moving the relationship forward. And I said from a positive perspective. I'll comment on that in just a second. But it's tough to say, men, we're on the men's side right now. You're the leader, so that guess what? You're the one who's going to develop this. You're the one who's going to lead in developing a good and healthy and holy and godly relationship. And if there's something wrong, you're going to lead in fixing it. That doesn't seem fair sometimes, does it? I mean, it doesn't. But sometimes people want to be the leader, but they don't want the responsibility of being a leader. And that's part of it. But again, it's when you hit it from the negative end, it just seems unfair. The negative end, I'll tell you a little bit about that. Anybody ever read this book, Love and Respect? This used to be one of the most popular books out there, but you would be surprised how many Christian counselors say, we don't like that. We don't want you to use this one anymore. And one of the main reasons is the premise of this book is that women most desire love, men most need respect. And it goes from that passage in Ephesians where it says, wives are to see to it that they what? Their husband. Yeah. And men respect their husband, and men, you are to what? Love your wives as yourselves. Okay. And so the book says, men, you are to own your character as a husband and as a child of God. You are to love your wife even when maybe it doesn't seem like, even if it's tough and maybe you don't have a lot of empirical reasons to say it. Okay? The same verse, by the way, and the same command, they say, and wives, you need to respect your husband even if that moment you don't have necessarily a lot of empirical reasons to do it. And that's where people say, that's not right. You don't respect people when they're not respectable. Do you get that emotion? Do you get that? I feel that. You don't respect people when they're not respectable. And I've said this question, so does the husband have to wait till you real lovable before he loves you? Well, no, unconditional love. What about unconditional respect? No. Unconditional love, unconditional respect. No. You got to earn that. Got to earn it. Got to earn it. Stop. I know what you're talking about back there, so stop it. You got to earn that stuff. And so, in other words, it takes everything. When people have that view, they say, it is the husband's responsibility to love unconditionally. And it's also the husband's responsibility to be completely respectable so the wife can respect him. So it is 100% on who to do everything? The man. Crazy thoughts there. That's the negative end, and that's why people get defensive. That's why that would make me get a little bit defensive. What are you talking about here? You're saying it's 100% me. The wife's just like, I'm just here floating, making sure you do everything right. That's a tough one. So that's the negative end, and I will always stick with this book because I think that's a valid concept. We all have to do our part. Amen. We have to do our part even when the other people don't quite get it. We do it. So, but from a positive perspective, the Lord has given me this opportunity. The Lord has given me, somebody's got to be the one who starts it, and I'm going to be the one. So I appreciate that responsibility. So understanding, having this picture, it'll help men who may think that relationship health should focus on the wife's submission. And that's a tough one sometimes. Well, if she'd just do it, there wouldn't be a problem. She just, whatever. Really. Focus on a wife's submission rather than the husband's leadership. The direction of the marriage depends on the husband's leadership. First and foremost,
leading in the right direction. They often think their focus is simply on earning an income, which is a social construct rather than a godly principle. Because yes, we have to go out there and earn a living. We have to go out there. It's our responsibility, but that doesn't mean when I come home I have no more spiritual responsibilities. I have nothing else. Leader, there's a lot associated with that. And understanding that picture, having the picture of Ephesians 5 and dreaming about what that looks like, painting that picture so that the work will seem like a few days instead of 7 years. Wives, as we will see, we're getting to this. I'm glad we're doing this before because, I get butchered when we start talking about the wives. Wives who do not have the perfect example to follow in the church. Christ is the perfect example, isn't he? Is the church the perfect example? No. A wife might say, well, I'm going to love my husband as Christ, I'm going to serve and submit as the church submits to Christ. Well, the church does a pretty stinky job sometimes. Sometimes that's a hard one to understand. But, however, they still have Christ's perfect example for character and behavior, which is the whole point. The Lord has empowered the church to walk in the footsteps of Jesus. And it's hard to believe that sometimes. It's hard for people to believe we can't be like Jesus. One of the great opportunities, and we'll get to this next time, is the Lord has given the wife the privilege of revealing how the church can be like Christ. Isn't that exciting? You might not feel like you can do it. Maybe the church isn't doing a good job, but you can. And the wife gets to prove that. Oh, gives me chills. Gives me chills to think about that. Keep going there. Understanding that picture will help wives who have had to deal with husbands who have not striven to reveal Christ. That's a tough thing. So having the picture of what it could be and having that goal makes it worth the work. Having that picture will help wives who have been injured by incorrect understandings of Scripture. I have heard it taught before, almost like wives are the husband's children, and they just obey like children. Has anybody ever heard that? Anything that sounds like that a little bit? Through the years, and I've even read books. I was raised in the Deep South, and some of those older churches, they were crazy about it. It sounded like when you get married, you just got a daughter. They do what you say. Yes, sir. Incorrect teachings of the Scriptures. And it'll help wives who have been influenced by the world to have negative feelings and definitions associated with the pure and beautiful teachings of God. Everything in Ephesians 5 is beautiful. It's desirable. It's good. And let me tell you, you want that picture, ladies. The man wants you want that picture because it's going to make a wonderful marriage. My last slide here, I get to that so I can start with Ephesians 5 with the ladies next time. So wives, godly wife. That's a nice shirt right there. I put godly wife for clip art, and this came up. I was like, oh, look at there. That's a nice shirt there. Seems a little braggadocious, but my wife could wear that, to be honest. So wives, prepare for Ephesians 5, because we're starting it next time, by praying for clarity apart from trauma reactions and worldly explanations. Some people have a hard time believing and grasping onto women, to Ephesians 5, because they've been hurt so bad by teachers who teach it wrong sometimes, and by men who take advantage of them. Try to step back from your trauma. It's hard. That's why we need one another. We need one another to point to the Lord and to help people through things. Okay? So try to step back. Seek somebody that will help you so you can step back and look at Ephesians not from that perspective. And worldly explanations. Because there's plenty of people that say, well, it doesn't really mean that. See to it that you respect your. Doesn't really mean that. It just means that if they're worthy of respect. That explanation is floating out around there, okay? That you can take your mind off of the worldly expectations that are out there. Second, be determined to see Ephesians 5 with fresh, unbiased eyes. Pretend like you're going to go to it like you've never read it before. It's exciting, so you're going to learn. And here's the thing. Look for the beauty and glorious opportunities rather than expecting burdens and injustice. You would be surprised how many times I say, let's turn to Ephesians 5 when I'm working with couples, Christian couples, where I almost see a sigh with the wife. Because it has been seen as burdensome for so long. By the way, if you're expecting burdensome and difficult, what are you going to see? Burdensome and difficult. So try to step back and say, that's not what I'm going to look for. I'm going to look for the treasure hidden in the field, because there's a treasure there. And the only reason that it's hidden. By the way, what is the only reason that the concept of Melchizedek as the high priest is difficult, according to Hebrews? What's the only reason that it's difficult to understand? Because your ears have become what? Dull. He says, this is difficult to explain because your ears have become dull of hearing. The only reason Ephesians is that difficult is because our ears have been dulled by craziness that's out there, okay? So we'll step back and we're going to see, not just for the man, we've seen that, but for the woman, the beauty in Ephesians. So look for it, seek it, and you'll find it. I look forward to getting started on this when I'm back in 3 weeks. And so, ladies, for real, men, you need to be praying about these things. Yeah, don't see it as a burden. Well, leadership, my responsibility. What do you mean? I felt like no, it's a joy. It's a wonderful thing that you can lead your family in a good direction. And then we're going to talk about the joys of Ephesians 5 for the ladies next time. The Lord is right. His ways are right. His ways are good. His ways are perfect. And when He gives that to us, we just pray that we can see it, translate it, make a picture to go towards with it so that we can work joyfully for 7 years as if it's a few days, and we'll be able to get there.